Hi there, and welcome to a Papetti Math YouTube video tutorial where I'm going to be teaching you, yes you, Algebra 1. And in this video, we're going to begin graphing linear inequalities. Now, if you haven't watched the videos for lessons 1 through 4 in this chapter, I suggest you go back and you check those videos out because they might be very helpful for what we're going to be doing right now in lesson 5. It says, at this point, you have become an expert at graphing linear equations on a coordinate plane. Lessons 1 through 4. Now we will graph linear inequalities on the coordinate plane as well. So let's consider the inequality y is less than 1/2 x plus 3 to begin. And it wants to know a couple of things about this inequality. Does the point -4, 8 satisfy the inequality? So how can we figure something like that out? Well, that coordinate point right there has an x value and it has a y value. And in our inequality right there, that's a tongue twister. In our inequality right there, we have an x value and a y value. So what we're going to do is we're going to substitute in our x and our y value to see what happens with that inequality. So my y value is 8, and then I have less than half of -4, because it said half of x plus 3. And now I'm going to get 8 is less than, and then half of -4 is -2, and -2 plus 3 gives me 1. Is 8 less than 1? No. Okay, so this first point does not satisfy the inequality. Let's go to the second point. 2, 4. Again, we have an x value and a y value, so let's substitute those points in. So we have 4 is less than half of 2 plus 3. And again, we're going to get 4 is less than half of 2 is 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. Is 4 less than 4? No. Okay, so the first 2 points do not satisfy the inequality. Let's check out the third point. 3, -1. So we'll take that x and y value again, and we'll substitute them in, and we'll get -1 is less than half of 3 plus 3. So we'll get -1 is less than half of 3 is 1.5, plus 3 is 4.5. And is -1 less than 4.5? And that answer is yes. So this third point does satisfy the inequality, while the first 2 points do not. And we'll see what that means visually when we go on and graph this inequality. So in order to graph an inequality now, it's very similar to an equation with a couple of things that are a tiny bit different. So let's take a look at part B. Graph the inequality on the grid. Begin by graphing a dashed or dotted line of the equation y equals 1/2 x plus 3. So we have the same 1/2 x plus 3 here, but it says begin by graphing a dashed or dotted line, and we'll talk about why it's dashed after we graph it. Okay, so how we would graph the line 1/2 x plus 3 is we'd start at the y-intercept of 3, and we would go up 1 unit and over 2 units because our slope is 1/2, or 1/2. And we'll continue that pattern for the duration of the graph, as many points that fit in the plane, and then I'm going to go backwards, and I'm going to go down 1, left 2, to continue in the opposite direction to extend this line as far as I can. Now it says to connect them with a dashed line. So that's a little bit different because we're used to connecting it with just a solid line. Sometimes we might in an inequality, but in this case, it's going to be a dashed line. Now, why is the line dashed, you ask? And the reason why is because when we graph this line, when we graph this linear equation right here, these are all of the points that make this equation equal. So this would make 4 is equal to 4, 3 is equal to 3, 2 is equal to 2, and so on. It would make all of the points that fall on this line equal, is the key word there, equal. Is there an equal sign in this inequality? And the answer is no, there's a less than. So all the points on this line make it equal. We don't want the points that make it equal. We want it that make that inequality less than. So that's our next part of this equation. The reason why the line is dashed is because we're not equal to those points. We have to be less than those points. And it says since y is less than, we will shade the area below the line downward on the y-axis. Also notice how part A makes sense with this graph. Okay, so that's getting ahead of ourselves. So let's first start by shading this graph down. Now, we're shading up or down when we do inequalities. It's because this says y is less than. We are only concerned about where y is less than, and our y-axis goes up and down. So based on this y-intercept, where are the y values less than that? And that's below the line. So we're going to be shading this down, and I like to shade it down with just perpendicular lines. It doesn't matter how many. You can make them very close together, or you could make them a little bit farther apart. But this would be a perfect shading downward of this inequality. And again, it's shading down because we're less than that line. These are all of the points in the shaded region. Any point down here makes it less than that inequality. So now, that it says also notice how part A makes sense with the graph. So let's graph this first point, negative 4, 8. Where does that point show up? Negative 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It shows up right there. Notice how this point's not in the shaded region. That's why it was not a solution. Let's look at the point 2, comma 4. 1, 2, comma 4. Oh, that point's on the dashed line, but it was not a solution. That means any point that's on the dashed line is not a solution to the inequality. It's because 4 is not less than 4. Remember we said before, the points on the line make it equal, but we're not equal here. We're less than only. So this is not a solution. That's why we said no for this one. And finally, our last point was 3, negative 1. So we'll go to 3, negative 1, and this point is definitely in the shaded area, and that's why it was a solution. So any point you pick in this solution set and substitute it in for the inequality will come out to a true inequality. Any point you pick in this unshaded area that you substitute into the inequality will make it an untrue inequality. It would not be true. So that's all for this exercise. And again, we want to remember that dashed lines mean it does not include the points. And remember, if you see dashed lines in other instances in math, normally it means they're not really there, like the equator, or maybe when you draw a three-dimensional shape and you have the dashed line back here, it's not really being shown there. It's invisible. So that's the same thing here, that this dashed line is like invisible. So any points that are on that dashed line are not included in your inequality. And if this video was helpful in graphing your first linear inequality, give it a thumbs up below. And you're ready to move on to now exercise number 2, where we're going to graph a couple more. All right. Thank you for watching.